As you are seated, let me ask your permission for something. I need your permission. I want to give you my opinion tonight. Is that all right? That's the first time I've ever asked for permission to do that. I'm going to tell you a little bit, I'm going to get a little bit bothered tonight in the next couple articles because I really want to let you know what's going on. Anybody know who this is? Beto ORourke. Now I want to tell you what's happening in America, and besides the fact that we are seeing America change drastically, and obviously one article after another will tell you that, we are also seeing the dumbing down of America. We are seeing Americans not understand what history is. We're seeing Americans not understand what politics are. We're seeing Americans not understand what the issues are. And most of all, we're seeing Americans buy some lies that are sold by our media. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not interested in conspiracy theory. I am interested in the raw facts. And so let me give you some of the raw facts. These are some articles that happened this week. Beto ORourke, climate change and the end of the world. Now, honestly, I would laugh through this whole thing if it wasn't so pathetic. But listen to it. I'm going out on a limb. I'm about to make a bold prediction. Contrary to the prognostications of Beto ORourke, this is the author saying this, the world will not end in 12 years. That's right. Beto ORourke is telling us that if we don't do something about climate change, the world is going to end in 12 years. Now, how many remember I gave you last week, I told you about that climate change article that came out from April of 1970, the first Earth Day, first time we started talking about climate change. Every scientist said that the Earth was going to end in 15 years if we didn't change our ways. There are going to be people wearing gas masks in New York City and at Los Angeles. Every single one of their predictions fell flat, didn't happen. 10 years, 1999, we should have been dead. One of them said in 20 years, that would be 1990, that mankind would have a massive starvation and die off. None of that has happened. It doesn't seem to bother anybody that none of that has happened. Their media doesn't say anything about it. And certainly the politicians that are running for office. Let me read this a little bit more. Now it's possible that the Lord will choose to return in 12 years, he says, but that's another story. This is the author. In the age of climate change hysteria, which by the way, there is no such thing as man-made climate change. You notice they changed it? Now it's not man-made, it's just climate change. There is climate change. I told you last week, there's one thing responsible for climate change. It's a thermonuclear ball in the center of our solar system called the sun. That's responsible for climate change, always has been. So there's no such thing as man-made. Now they just changed it to climate change. I do believe the climate's changing, not because of man. And let me tell you something, if you wait long enough, it'll change back. Because that's what's happened over thousands of years. Now watch. The scientists are unanimous on this. This is Beto ORourke saying this. He says the clock is ticking. The world clock is ticking, and it's ticking fast. I'm quoting him. The scientists are unanimous on this. We have no more than 12 years to take incredibly bold action on this crisis, ORourke said. That is hogwash. Can we make it? I don't know. He says it's up to every one of us. Do you want to make it? This over-the-top apocalyptic climate change rhetoric deserves a skeptical response. The question is, will it get the skeptical, critical response it deserves, or will the hysteria reach a fever pitch? It's going to reach a fever pitch. You have millennials and you have people coming up that believe all this garbage, and there's no pun intended there. 12 years and counting to save the planet, otherwise we're doomed, he says. But I know enough to recognize hyperbole when I see it. I know enough to recognize appeals to mass hysteria. And this is certainly one of them, this author says. I remember seeing a striking TV ad during one of Bill Clinton's presidential campaigns. There was an elderly couple whose house burned down because the fire department arrived too late. Why? It was because of the evil policies of the Republicans who would introduce, if elected, the fire department and the police would be understaffed. The cutbacks would be deadly, literally. If Bill Clinton was not elected president, old people would be burning to death. That's what they do. They stretch it all out. Now it's even worse. The whole world will be destroyed if we don't act quickly. And that means we must elect Beto ORourke for president. He will save the planet. To quote him again, science has made clear that we should do nothing less than marshal every resource in the country to meet this challenge, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, to get to net zero emissions, which means not only must we emit less greenhouse gases, we must plant things that absorb greenhouse gases and carbon, and investing in technology to allow us to claim some that are in the air now. That is really dumb rhetoric. First of all, CO2, which is what they're talking about, greenhouse, is needed on our planet. We need CO2 for our plants to grow. Photosynthesis doesn't happen without CO2. One notable scientist just said, we are lowest in CO2 we've ever been as a planet. We need more CO2. And so climate change has it all backwards. And he says we have 12 years to do it or else. The scary thing, this article goes on to say, is not that this new presidential candidate believes this timetable to be true. What's scary is that today's intellectual environment is such that he can say these things without being laughed to scorn. Worse still, he believes that this kind of rhetoric will help his campaign rather than hurt it. And the really pathetic thing is he might be right. In other words, it isn't just the radical leftists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who suggest that it may not be ethical to have children because of climate change. She doesn't want us to have any more children. Our carbon footprint on the planet is too big right now. I should tell her, and I don't mean to be gross at all, but there's more flatulence that comes out of cows than there are from people putting a carbon footprint in America. So I don't even know what they're talking about. She said there's scientific consensus. I love the way they say that. There is no scientific consensus. They have their own scientists. It's like going to a court of law. The prosecutor brings his expert witnesses, and the defender brings his expert witnesses. They disagree to make the other person not guilty or guilty. That's exactly what's happening here. So it goes on to say this. Rather, she says there's scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult, only if she stays in office. Amen. Okay. And it does lead young people to have a legitimate question, is it okay to still have children? Do you understand what's happening? The Bible gave us a directive, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth. This is all anti-scriptural. Not to have children. The whole society is pushing us this way. Now watch, it goes a little bit further. Rather, as a recent headline announced, new birth strike movement. So now we have women striking, not being able to not wanting to have birth. Has women saying no to kids because of climate change. Yes, a number of women in recent years have found a way to reduce the average carbon footprint just by doing nothing. The research suggests not having kids is the most impactful thing we can do to decrease our carbon footprint. And more women have begun questioning whether or not they should have children at all. That's sad. That's really sad. So we save the human race by not having children. That's pretty brilliant, isn't it? This is even more short-sighted than China's one child per family policy. So let me comment. I wrote a couple scribbles down there. Just a couple. Almost as long as the article itself. So let me get this right. So they're telling us we should ignore that the world is killing Christians in mass numbers, as we'll see that later on. We should understand that we should promote doctor-aided suicide, euthanasia, to cut down on people who are sickly or who may be elderly. We should promote LGBTQRSTUV, whatever else is in there, agenda of non-reproducing homosexuals, which will, you understand if the whole planet was homosexual, there would be no mankind. Okay, stop having children so our carbon footprint is less. And oh, by the way, while you're at it, kill babies, and when you try to abort them and they come out live, kill them anyway. In short, kill off those you don't like, kill off the elderly and the sickly, promote non-reproductive homosexual agenda, stop having children, and the result, Beto ORourke, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders will be the only ones left on the planet. All right, let me give you another article on Beto ORourke. Former Representative Beto ORourke is running for president in 2020. On Tuesday, the Washington Post published a lengthy interview with ORourke, where reporter Jenna Johnson essentially grilled ORourke on what he actually believes. After reading it, it's still very difficult to answer that question. Now, I'm not going to read you the rest of it because it makes no sense at all. They ask him questions and he mumbles back and forth. He talks about people should be able to decide what we should do. We should have a committee on whether we should take people out of war zones. We should have a committee on whether we should have a wall. Listen, if we should have a committee, why do we need you as a president? So 27 times he answered, I don't know. 27 times. Let me give you this. He's one of the scariest, you ready for this? He's one of the scariest illiterate, I don't think he has any knowledge at all, running for president. He's a mindless, ignorant, know-nothing. That's just my opinion. I'm trying to hold back a little bit. All he knows how to do is wave his hands and smile. He was in a border state. They asked him about the wall. He says, well, out of 6 years he served in Congress. He was on a border state that has trouble with the border. He says, well, I really don't know. We need a committee for that. He has no opinion at all, and the people are loving him because the media is pushing him. I have article after article about him. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read a couple more for you. I'm going past a lot of these. This article actually says Beto ORourke says a whole lot of nothing, and that's exactly what he says. He says absolutely nothing. There's so much gray area that he has that we're really not sure who he is. ORourke answered, I don't know, to over 27 questions pertaining to issues facing the American people. Are you kidding me? Beto ORourke is a joke. He's a joke. He's not a political candidate. He's a pathetic silhouette of someone wanting to please everyone by not taking a stance on anything. Next article on Beto ORourke, all this week. Beto ORourke on third trimester abortions should be decision the women makes. Of course he's going to say that because he has no opinion. So he's saying, well, the women should make that decision. We shouldn't. The women should. So it's over and over again trying to to placate people just for votes. Beto, Biden, and Bernie is the next one, from the Washington Post, no doubt. The B-boys and the media's dangerous, self-fulfilling prophecy. This is from the Washington Post. They're pretty liberal. Listen to it. As amorous embraces go, few could be more ardent than the one Beto ORourke got this month from Vanity Fair magazine. They put him on the cover, and he's standing like Ronald Reagan. He has jeans on, and he has his hands in the back. They're pushing him. They're pushing an image of him, and he's by a pickup truck. I promise you, the pickup truck's like a 1980. I promise you, he does not own a 1980 pickup truck. I promise you, it comes from an extremely rich family. Now, just listen to it. So the perfectly timed cover treatment was the full Monty. Rugged glam photo by the legendary Annie Leibovitz, the former Texas Congressman's Ernest Kennedy-esque gaze, and the ripe for parody headline, including this immortal quote. Here's what he said: "I'm just born to be in it." Rest of the news media, including Network Evening News, helped spread the image around, and they gave an over-the-top coverage to O'Rourke's kickoff. Does soft-focus treatment like this help a candidate's cause? It sure doesn't hurt. His campaign raised more than $6 million in its first day. He is a non-entity. They made him something overnight. Edging out Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont. Impressive one-day fundraising a few weeks ago. A few days later, the website PredictIt listed as its top 3 presidential contenders former Vice President Joe Biden, who, by the way, who hasn't even declared yet, Sanders, and O'Rourke. Somehow, despite a remarkably diverse Democratic field, which includes a record number of women, a gay man, several people of color, the B-boys, that's Beto, Biden, and Bernie, were off and running. The news media undoubtedly was part of the equation. With more than 18 months to go before the 2020 election, the love and attention was not being dished out in equal measure. They are steering America into 3 candidates. The media is doing it, and trust me, they're doing an awfully good job. Almost cartoonish way in which the national media depicts candidates as characters in a drama. The national media is mostly interested in telling stories in an almost novelistic way. This candidate, like the B-boys, a structural advantage he has. National media look for an endless repeat, the broad brush caricature. O'Rourke is tall and cute, that's a matter of opinion, and wants to heal a divided country. Men don't ever call their men cute, so I don't know who's writing this. And when many Democratic voters put sheer electability, all they want to do is unseat President Trump as a top priority. This media-driven momentum takes on even more power. That's potentially dangerous, the Wall Street Post says. It would be a shame and counterproductive if premature judgments end up transforming all this diversity and talent into a shrugged-off bunch of also-rans. What the Wall Street Journal is saying is this. It's saying that basically what's happening is you're seeing the Washington Post. They're saying this. They're saying what's happening is the media is eliminating all these other people that are running in the candidacy for presidency from the Democratic Party because they're focusing on these 3 because they're the most electable. Why would they do that? They're most electable because they're pushing a fine face in front of people because they're trying to steer the vote. And basically, they want to eliminate anybody they're not going to vote for. I'm going to tell you something. I don't like her stances and what she says, but I want you to understand some of the candidates that are there. Warren knows more about policy than all 3 of those guys put together. But I'm not crazy about her at all. But it's kind of interesting to me that they're pushing certain people. And as they're pushing certain people, obviously they're the ones that are going to take the Democratic nomination. Let me give you this one. We've been telling you about AIs, and this one's kind of interesting. This article says this: Antichrist Prototype, the talking Buddhist AI deity. The Kodeji Temple, a 400-year-old Buddhist temple in Kyoto, Japan, made world headlines this week when they unveiled a sutra-chanting android named Mindar. Mindar is modeled on a Buddhist deity named Kannon. Worshipping throughout Japan, Kannon is known as the Buddhist goddess of mercy. Tradition says Kannon takes different forms to help people. You getting it? Now the Buddhists are saying that Kannon, their god that they've been worshiping for almost 2,000 years, has taken the image of an android, of an AI. So people are worshiping this AI. Now, don't tell me I wasn't ahead of the game when I told you about the AIs a long time ago and told you how the Antichrist is going to use them. They're worshiping her. She's programmed to repeat the Heart Sutra, which is a revered Buddhist text. So she's programmed it's like her being programmed to repeat the Bible verses. So people are enamored with her and they're worshiping her. They're falling down and worshiping her and bringing her gifts. It's an android. This is an AI. So Don't tell me that the world's not gullible to an Antichrist. And it's happening right now. Let me give you another one. As we go to economy. So we see a lot of things happening in America. This one's kind of shocking. This is student loan debt. Student loan debt has reached record high levels, and its impacts are being felt throughout the entire economy. The crisis will be hard on those deeply indebted, but is also a drag on the nation's economy as a whole. When compared to a similar point in time, millennials are deeper in debt than any other generation that has ever come before them. According to the New York Fed, the total amount of debt the millennials are carrying has risen by a whopping 22% in the last 5 years. 22% in 5 years, larger than any other generation in history. The situation may leave you wondering how millennials ended up in such a sorry state. Many young adults are absolutely drowning in debt. But the composition of that debt is quite different when compared to previous generations at a similar point in time. Let me tell you what the article is going to tell you. Is that generations before millennials, their big debt was on mortgages. Well, millennials, the housing starts are down because millennials are getting out of college and they can't afford a mortgage. They're living with their parents. They can't afford a mortgage. So home sales are down because their debt is gigantic. According to a 2018 report from the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, mortgage debt is about 15% lower for millennials, and credit card debt among millennials was about 2/3 lower than Generation X. However, student loan debt, 300% higher. So they owe $1.5 trillion. Now, there's a big problem there because our college and university are not adequately prepared our young people for future careers. I told you last week, I'm not really sure you should go to college or send your kids to college. I'm not really sure it's what they says it is. They put them behind the 8 ball. Basically, when they get out of college, many of them don't have any jobs in their fields, and they paid all this money instead of learning a trade. Maybe they've paid all this money, got to pay it off, and they can't afford a mortgage. And so what's happening? Plus the fact they're getting indoctrinated in college against God. There are more liberals in colleges and more atheists in college professors than you could possibly shake a stick at. And we're watching it come back home to roost. Millennials. It says this: due to the fact that so many of them are swamped by student loan debt, the homeownership rate for millennials is much, much, much lower than the homeownership rate for a generation that immediately preceded them. This is one of the big reasons why the housing bubble, too, is beginning to burst. There are not enough millennials buying homes, and it looks like things could get even worse for Generation Z. So what is the Democratic response to that? Give free college. There's no such thing as free. I don't understand that. You know, if you go to a store and they say we have something free, trust me. Or they tell you it's the biggest sale ever, trust me. Ronnie Marchant went 30 years telling you about sales. They just upped the price. Free, who's going to pay for college? Look at your neighbor, saying you are. Because in order to have, I told you this before, socialism has to have the democratic process. That has to have a free market to work. It has to have capitalism to work. And so you can't give to the have-nots if you don't have any haves. So if you're making money and you're earning money in a capitalistic society, you are the haves. So who pays for it? Everything the government gives out is paid for by you. Those of you that pay taxes. Come on. How many of you like paying your taxes? I hate paying taxes because it doesn't go to me. It goes to all the people with handouts. Some of them may be legitimate, but trust me, a lot of them are not. Let me give you a little bit more in Palestine. This is going to make a lot of sense for you. If you remember, 2 weeks ago, there were 2 rockets that came out of Gaza, and they went into Tel Aviv. Now, Gaza, the northern part of Gaza to Tel Aviv is only about 70 miles. And so they shot these 2 rockets off, and when they said they landed in uninhabited places, which they did, I'm sure, where they think one of them was shot down by the Iron Dome. Kind of interesting to me because Tel Aviv is like New York City. I'm not really sure there's much uninhabited. But anyway, I thought it was really weird because nobody, and I told you this last week, nobody claimed responsibility for it. Hamas didn't at first, and neither did the Islamic Jihad, which is centered in Gaza. Now, Gaza is run by Hamas. Hamas has run it for the last several years. Just listen to this article, and it'll make a lot of sense why these 2 rockets went. And by the way, I knew that there wasn't going to be an escalation of war. I have a group right now that I took one of the pastors over last time we went to Israel, and he's taken a group over. He's leaving in about a day or two. I'm just waiting for him to call me and saying, should we go? Because it's not going to be an escalation of a war. It's kind of a really weird thing that happened. When I read it last week, I thought this is really strange because usually Hamas jumps right on it that they did it. Listen to this and you'll understand the mechanics of what's going on. Hamas has again proved that it's really a terrorist group that oppresses its people and prevents them from expressing their opinions. It has also shown that when it is in trouble, it will do the utmost to divert attention from the problem it's facing at home. Now listen real closely. As far as Hamas is concerned, one of the best ways to divert attention from the growing frustration with its rule is by attacking Israel and Jews. Then Israel is forced to respond to defend itself. That will allow Hamas to tell its people that there is no room for internal fighting and disputes because we are under attack by the Jews. No Palestinian would dare to criticize Hamas while Israel is supposedly attacking Hamas. Anyone who did so would be accused of being a traitor and collaborating with the Zionist enemy. So what happened? Well, that's exactly what happened this last week when 2 rockets were fired at the Israeli city of Tel Aviv. Here's the real story. The rocket attacks came shortly after thousands and thousands of Palestinians had taken to the streets of the Gaza Strip to protest the horrific economic situation there. That funds intended for them had apparently been diverted to finance terrorism by Hamas. And demanded an end to Hamas's repressive measures against its people. That's why they fired the rockets. There are thousands of them in the streets of Gaza, Palestinians protesting against Hamas. So in order to take attention away from themselves, they fire 2 rockets into Israel so that they say, oh, well, Israel's our enemy, and the people disperse. Listen, I want you to understand what's happening there. Hamas has been ruling in the Gaza since the summer of 2007. And basically, in the past few days, thousands of Palestinians have taken to the streets of Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip to protest the wretched economic conditions exacerbated by a Hamas decision to impose new taxes on them. They keep taxing these people who have 57% unemployment. The unprecedented protests, which were carried out under the banner of "We want to live," that's what they're saying in the streets. We want to live. We want to eat. That's what they're saying to the Hamas leaders. These are Palestinians. The world doesn't tell you that. CNN doesn't tell you that. Israel gives most of the foreign aid to Palestinians. They ship food into them. They ship building materials in them. Concrete. What did they do with the concrete? Hamas took it and they made tunnels. And so they're not the oppressors. Israel's not the oppressors of the Palestinians. Their own leadership are the oppressors. And whenever the people rise up, what they do is shoot a couple rockets to divert attention. How many of you get it? Photos of wounded Palestinians, broken arms, bruises all over their bodies have surfaced on some social media sites showing the brutality of the violence that Hamas used to disperse the protesters. It's also worth noting that many of the Palestinians who were brutally beaten by Hamas were children. And so we're not getting the whole story. We never do in America. Let me give you a couple other things that are going on. And again, this may be controversial for some people that are listening tonight, but just listen to the whole thing. Why are mass killing of Christians not given media attention? Last week, when a deranged lunatic gunned down dozens of Muslims at 2 mosques in New Zealand, it suddenly became the biggest news story in the world, and rightly so. It was a major news event, and it needed to be reported. But shouldn't mass killings of Christians be given the same sort of media coverage? Sadly, we all know that doesn't happen. Whenever there's a mass killing of Christians, it's usually entirely ignored by the mainstream media in the United States, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out why it's happening. Those that control the mainstream media consider Christians to be one of the main obstacles to progress in this country. And so any story that would put Christians in a positive or sympathetic light simply doesn't fit into the narratives that they're pushing. As a result, the lack of media coverage, the vast majority of Americans do not know, you ready for this? That 4,136 Christians were killed for faith-related reasons last year alone. That number breaks down to an average of 11 Christians per day are killed for their faith around the world. In Nigeria, more than 120 Christians have been gunned down or killed with machetes over the past 2 weeks. But Breitbart was the only big medium news outlet to say it. They were employing machetes and gunfire to slaughter men, women, and children, burning down over 140 house churches, destroying property and spreading terror. The New York Times did not place the story on the front page. In fact, they didn't cover it at all. Apparently, when assessing all the news that's fit to print, the massacre of African Christians didn't measure up. The same can be said of the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, the Detroit Free Press, the LA Times, and every other major paper in the United States. So why won't anybody else report on this? This isn't the first time it's happened. Last June, 12 entire Christian villages in central Nigeria were completely wiped out. As many as 200 Christians have been killed. However, some residents fear the death toll may be even higher. This past Sunday, 75 of those victims were buried in a mass grave. I'll bet most of us have never heard of that. On the other side of the world, 20 innocent people were slaughtered when Muslim radicals bombed a Roman Catholic cathedral in January. Once again, it's another mass killing that was almost entirely ignored by the mainstream media. Is this anti-Christian bias among the mainstream media so strong that they can't even bring themselves to report the basic facts to us? People deserve to know what's happening. Christian persecution is rising in almost every single nation on the planet. And this huge ongoing crisis should be on our front pages on a continual basis. But instead, we never get to hear any of these stories unless we seek out alternative news sources. Over in China, the persecution of Christians has reached a frightening crescendo.
Recently, officials have been going house to house and replacing pictures of Jesus Christ with pictures of dictator Mao Zedong and China's current authoritarian president Xi Jinping. The Chinese Communist Party continues to harass and persecute Christians, but they aren't stopping there. Bibles are being burned, and any church that does not cooperate with Chinese officials is either being shut down or destroyed. Earlier in 2019, wait to hear this one of the largest mega churches in the entire country was literally blown to pieces with dynamite. 50,000 people were members of that church. 50,000. They blew it off the planet. They blew it out of the air. Since 1993, President ORourke has overseen an authoritarian and brutal rule in Eritrea. Christians have been imprisoned in small shipping containers in scorching heat. In North Korea, Christians are being hung on a cross over fire, crushed under steamrollers, herded off bridges, and trampled underfoot. According to the charity aid and to the Church in Need, at least 200,000 Christians have gone missing in North Korea since 1953. But does our media say anything about it? Absolutely not. Let me tell you something. I do not listen to CNN at all. I don't turn in on NBC. The only way they're going to get it is if we stop listening. The only time I listen to it is when I feel I want to break my TV. That's the only time I listen to it. So if you were to replace Christians with some other favored group in any of the examples that I've just read, you'd instantly have front page news all over the planet. The mainstream media is definitely not independent, and they are not looking out for us. They have their own agenda, and anything that does not fit that agenda does not get to be part of the news. So far in 2019, there have been 453 Islamic terror attacks in which 1,956 people have been murdered. But you will never hear those numbers from the mainstream media. They'll never tell you that one Muslim attacked anybody. But they've murdered 1,900 people, 1,956. It's absolutely sick. So many Americans are just absolutely sick and tired of being lied to by the big media companies. Listen, don't be fooled. Our news is nothing more than propaganda. It's pushing an agenda. And let me tell you this, the agenda they're pushing is because of money. It's not because of people. It's not because they're so liberal they want it. No, it's money. You know what they know? They know that Trump took half of the vote. They are going for the other half of the people that didn't vote for him, that voted for Hillary, and they are anti-Trump, anti-Christian, liberal agenda all the way down the line. They're trying to appeal to them because of this. It all boils down to money. Man, aren't you glad you came to church tonight? China, rewriting the Bible. I'm not going to read it to you. China is now putting phrases in the Bibles. They're taking the Bibles from churches, confiscating them. They're putting phrases in that promote communism. Let me give you this one. Al-Aqsa Mosque in Quran is not in Jerusalem. Let me show you this. This is the Eastern Gate. That is a Muslim cemetery in front of it. This is a Muslim scholar that I'm going to quote from tonight. Syrian scholar Firas al-Sawa said in a March 3rd interview on Al-Hira TV that the Al-Aqsa Mosque that was mentioned in the Quran is not in Jerusalem, and that Caliph Abu Malik ibn Marwan had decided to build a place in Jerusalem and call it the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There's two mosques on top of that 35 acres. One of them is the Dome of the Rock, built in 622 AD. The other one is a black dome. It's called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's where Muslims believe that Muhammad took his wing journey to heaven on a horse with wings. I mean, it's called a Pegasus. Our little girls had them. They're fairy tales. So he took a Pegasus. He took a fairy tale to heaven. What the Bible says, what the Quran says, is that he took a faraway journey. They don't tell you the city. This sheikh decided to put it there. And then they have what's called the hadiths. Hadiths are Muslim stories. They're like Noah's Ark is a story from our Bible, based on the Bible. But the hadiths are based on sometimes just hearsay, things that are passed down. Well, Muslims are supposed to take those hadiths as literal. So this man says, also says that the hadiths should be critically examined to determine which ones are true and which ones are false in the Quran. And he recalled having laughed in 8th grade when the teacher taught the class the hadith, the story, about the trees and rocks calling Muslims to kill Jews hiding behind them. He said the whole class laughed. And what happened was the teacher said, "Why are you laughing?" Because he said, we had some science thought. We knew that rocks don't speak. We knew that trees don't speak. But let me remind you that most Muslims, now listen to this very carefully, most Muslims are illiterate. They can't write and they can't read. So if you go to some of the nations like Qatar is 92% illiterate. 92%. And so they believe anything someone's told them. Obviously, that's how the Quran has gotten so much traction. All right, let me give you another one under moral decay. Female high school student files civil rights complaint. I felt very violated changing in the locker room when transgender student was looking at me. I knew this was going to happen. You know, all you have to do is pose as somebody being transgender and you can get into a female locker room. Well, this goes on, it's in Pennsylvania.
she was undressing, taking her pants off, and she saw somebody who spoke. She heard somebody with a male voice. She turned around, and this person was staring at her in their underwear, and she said he was obviously a man. I could tell that. And she said, I felt very uncomfortable. She filed a lawsuit. And so, people really, I think, let me see that. Do you still have that? Okay, I want to see it. There's a lot of cartoons that are coming out about this. It's a serious issue, but there's a lot of things happening because basically we're seeing something that's really a turnaround, and we're seeing an opportunity for people to really take advantage of things based on this liberal mindset. She showed me something today when she came in. It's a cartoon, and under it says this: breaking news. A man followed a young girl into a Target bathroom in Texas saying he self-identified as a woman. The man's teeth were knocked out by the girl's father, who said he self-identifies as the tooth fairy. That I liked. All right, let me give you just two last ones if we can. This is something that's interesting. That is Daniel's the vision of Nebuchadnezzar that Daniel interpreted of the 5 major kingdoms. I'm going to read a little bit of this to you. I know it's kind of lengthy, but I want you to get it all. For several decades, Christians have speculated on whether or not the European Union is the final world empire outlined in the Bible. The book of Daniel and the book of Revelation point to a revived Roman Empire that will appear in the end times. That's Daniel chapter 7, by the way, and Revelation 17. Since World War II, prophecy watchers have paid careful attention to the slow and steady unification of Western Europe. And I did this way back when I was studying prophecy. The common market was what the European Union used to be called. The common market was 7 nations. When it became 7 nations, I got all excited because this could be the 10-nation confederacy. It quickly went to 27 nations. Now listen, in June 2016 referendum, United Kingdom voters opted to leave the European Union. The media labeled the British exit vote as Brexit, or British exit, and many quickly announced the death of the European Union, believing the vote would lead other nations to leave as well. But is this the most likely outcome? No. If anything, Brexit is just another indication Bible prophecy students are correct when they compare the EU to Daniel's revived Roman Empire. Almost 3 years, by the way, after the UK shocked the world by voting yes to leave the EU, now they want to put a referendum out. They want to go, it's been 3 years. They want to go over, they want to give the people another vote, like, if you're in a democracy, which England is, United Kingdom, I should say. If you're in a democracy, the people vote, that's the answer. Well, now they're not satisfied with that. They're giving problems to them. So now Theresa May is saying, she's saying we need to do this. Well, Parliament's saying, no, we need to take another referendum. Let them vote again. That's not a democracy. That's saying I want to vote until we get it our way. Then they're saying, well, if they don't want to let them vote, let us override them. That's also not a democracy. So listen, while some people think Brexit is a step backwards in Bible prophecy, I think it's just the opposite, just as this man does. Brexit is yet another reason to believe some of the EU will become Daniel's prophesied final empire. And I've said this, the EU is going to either meddle down or it's going to incorporate other nations and become 10 nations. It is Daniel's 10-nation confederacy. But listen, for instance, the Bible says the final world empire will be a kingdom of 10 nations, Daniel 2, from among the ancient Roman Empire, made up of weak and strong nations, of nations trying to strengthen themselves or by forming alliances with each other, and nations that fail to hold together or gel, just as iron and clay doesn't stick together. Those are all quotes from the scripture. So, revived Roman Empire. According to Daniel, the Antichrist will arise from a nation whose armies destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That nation was Rome. So the global empire's ruler will come from Rome. Second, when explaining Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel described 5 empires that will rule Israel before Jesus returns. He was only living in the one, which is Babylon. Those empires were Babylon, which Daniel was living in, Media-Persia, which came next, Greece, Rome, and a 10-nation alliance. He describes each successive kingdom, but he makes no distinction between the 4th kingdom and the 10-nation alliance. In other words, the 10-nation alliance will be a new form of the 4th kingdom. It'll be Rome. Later, Daniel has another vision. This time he sees 4 beasts, each representing a world power that will conquer Israel, Daniel 7. We know the 4th beast is Rome because it conquers the 3rd beast, Greece. But we also know it will come back. Why? Because it will rule the whole earth, and it will be ruled by Antichrist. Rome neither ruled the whole earth, nor was it ruled by Antichrist. So it's coming. Also, this empire is yet again described as a 10-nation alliance, and the ancient Roman Empire never took the form of a 10-nation alliance. Today, the EU sits on the ashes of the ancient Roman Empire. Ancient Rome occupied nearly every part of the current EU member nations, including Italy, home to Rome itself. 2, an alliance of weak and strong nations. The global empire Daniel described will be a group of weak and strong nations. Does this describe the EU? Well, the EU contains the world's 4th, 5th, and 6th largest economies, Germany, United Kingdom, and France. But it also contains the world's 98th, 102, and 124th
smallest economies, Estonia, Iceland, and Malta. 3, divided alliance loosely held together. The global empire Daniel described will also be divided. It will struggle to hold itself together just as iron and clay struggle to hold themselves together. Do we see this type of alliance as we look at the EU? Absolutely. Since its inception, the EU has been an odd collection of politicians, governments, economies, currencies, and militaries. From the Schuman Declaration of 1950 to the Treaty of Lisbon in 2007, the rise of the EU has been marked by a struggle to agree on important issues. And this include arguments over a single currency. The United Kingdom and Denmark opted out of the euro. Disagreements over how to handle debt crisis, like the Greek bailouts, and disputes over open borders, the Syrian refugee crisis. Each step along the way, the EU struggled to survive. And that's exactly where Brexit comes in. Critics point to Brexit as the evidence of the EU is not becoming a global empire. Not the coming global empire. But the exact opposite is true. Brexit is just the latest example of the EU's struggle to stay together, just as iron and clay don't hold together. That means the UK can leave the EU without an exit deal in place. Such a scenario could wreak havoc on the UK economy and quite possibly the world economy. Because of the threat of economic disaster, some politicians are calling for a new referendum or to override the present one. All this volatility makes it more likely the EU is an early phase of the alliance Daniel described. It's the mirror of the image of the revived Roman Empire the Bible says will appear in the last days. It's made up of weak nations. It's weak and strong nations. It's divided against itself. The effort of these nations to come together and strengthen themselves is volatile and unstable. And these Bible verses sound an awful lot like the EU. And I'm telling you, the EU is the 10-nation confederacy. No matter how they get there, it is Daniel's last image. And so Brexit isn't the end of the EU. It's just the latest event pointing to the rise of Daniel's global empire. It's another sign that Jesus is coming. And he is. You're in the last empire. It's another sign. I'm going to show you this only because all of our news is so bad so many times that I want to tell you the goodness of God. God is amazing. His creative ability is unbelievable. You cannot describe God. You can't prove God with a finite mind because he's infinite. But every now and then we get a glimpse by some of our technology into the solar system and beyond into our universe. Scientists have spotted this 2 weeks ago. Astronomers found a pulsar. A pulsar is a body that's very dense. It's from an exploding star and it rotates very fast. It gives off a gamma ray, and so we can detect the gamma rays. Found a pulsar hurtling through space. Are you ready for this? At 2.5 million miles an hour. Who creates something like that? Only a God. 2.5 million miles an hour. It's hurtling through space. They can find it because it's giving off a beep. And as it goes through space, they can hear the beep, and they can understand that this beep came here, and then, you ready for this? 2.5 million miles, and an hour later, it's over here. 2.5 million miles. By the way, if you want to know what that means that it would make it from the Earth to the moon at that speed in about 5 seconds. Wow. So, listen, you have a choice. Not you, but all of us have a choice. You can believe in God, or you can believe that we crawled out of some primordial soup as little kind of amoebas. I'd rather believe in God, especially when I see things like that. That's in the news for tonight. I'm going to ask the ushers as they come forward.